Police, racism and resistance. There's an old song that goes something like, war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And I think the same could be applied to the police, which is a fairly radical view, has to be said. I could get locked up for it in the current climate of McCarthyism and Islamophobia. We've got to be very careful what we say, but that is true. But what are they for? It's not an accident that working class people have lots of different names for the police. My favourite is the filth. The Americans like pigs, or the, not quite as rude, the busies, which is another one, which tells you something about what the police are about. They're about harassing and keeping working class people in their place fundamentally. But as someone asked me, a new member asked me at a Tottenham branch meeting recently, a young white woman, single mum, and she said, but why do we keep going on about the police and black people though? Because the police are horrible to all people. Well, that's a good, that's a big grain of truth, boulder of truth in that. But actually, as we replied to her, yes, that's true. They are horrible to all working class people, and even the odd Tory if they are in the way of their plans. Mr. Mitchell will tell us about that in Plebgate. But there is a disproportionate attention that they give to black people, and to explain that we can only do it by using by talking about racism. And the most recent case, just to make that absolutely clear, is that of Ezell Rodney, who was killed in North London a few years ago, and that's just come up in court. I don't know if people have seen that one. He was shot 8 times. An armed person shot 8 times in his car, and still gets off. The policeman, Mr. Long, Anthony Long, still gets off in the court on the basis that, well, his life was in danger. I thought that he might have a gun, or I thought he might shoot me. And this is a familiar refrain we get time and time again. Big case is, of course, Mark Duggan, which comrades, of course, will be familiar with. And it's just worth recounting how that all started off in the first place. The so-called riot, I prefer to call it uprising. I think it's a much better expression. It started in Tottenham and spread around the country. But when Mark was killed, there's the old golden hour rule that the police use, which is to get their version of the story, because some players get their lies out first before anyone else has a alternative narrative, as they put it. And so that's what they did. They swang into action. So first of all, we heard that he was a gangster. Then we heard there was a shootout with the police. Then we heard that one of Mark Duggan's bullets lodged in the radio of an officer. So in other words, he'd almost been killed by Duggan, but just for his radio being in the way, he stopped that bullet hitting his head and what have you. But actually, none of that was true. It was all lies. It was all made up. None of those people that told those lies have gone to prison for perjury or anything of the sort. And those lies, unfortunately, still stand in the heads of many people out in Britain, despite the fact they're all lies. None of the above was true. Mark Duggan had a minor criminal record. He wasn't a gang member. He didn't fire at the police. No lodged bullet from a ricochet got lodged in the policeman's radio. That was a lie. And of course, most importantly, they could have arrested him, because as it came out later in the inquest, they're doing the surveillance of him. So they knew exactly where he was, exactly what time he was going places and so on. So they could have arrested him at any time when he went to pick up supposedly the gun in the box and so on. But they didn't do that. Instead, they chose to do the hard stop and to execute him on the streets of Tottenham. There was no gun in Mark Duggan's possession at the time of the shooting. According to the IPC, a gun was found in a box behind a wall near where the shooting happened. And people might not be familiar with the area, but it's just patently can't be possible that he somehow threw this box out of the window of the car and no police officer noticed this, and it managed to end up over the other side of a wall. So it was all lies. This begs some really big questions not just in the black community, but across society about the nature of the police. And as I said at the beginning, when that comrade asked about why just black people, because they're horrible to all people, well, let's be clear about what we mean. Actually, they're there to do a class job for the rich, the elites, as they're commonly called these days, for the ruling class of this country. They're there to do a job for them. So that's why we're not too surprised to know about Hillsborough. That's why we're not too surprised to hear about the stories that come out about Orgreave, the hammering that the miners got. All of a sudden, there was no crime in Surrey anymore. I say that because they took all the police out of Surrey and sent them up to South Yorkshire and billeted them in the pit villages to try and break the strike with an occupation of the coalfields by the police. So they're there to do a job. And that job is to maintain the rule of the ruling class in this country. And from the very outset, that was what they were told to do. So when the Metropolitan Police was set up, it empowered constables to apprehend all loose, idle and disorderly persons whom we shall find disturbing the public peace, or whom he shall have justice cause to suspect of any evil designs, and all persons whom he shall find between sunset and the hour of 8 in the forenoon, lying in any highway, yard, or other place, or loitering therein, and not giving a satisfactory account of themselves. Well, the first thing to say, I guess, is that the police are going to be bloody busy trying to catch everyone who's out on the streets after dark, or whatever. But there you have it. That's what the Metropolitan Police was set up to do, to make sure that the rich stayed rich and then that the poor stayed in their place. And all these nice, wonderful gates that you see all around some of the parks around here were, with the express purpose of keeping the working class people out of certain parts of London. It's all coming back, lots of this stuff. Paul doors we now have in parts of these new developments in East London and elsewhere. So that's what they were. That's what they were set out to do. Now, of course, it's now coming back to the issue of racism. People say, well, now how can it be that all the police are racist? Because I've met one or two nice police officers, and I'll put my hands up. I've met one or two non-horrible police officers, if I can put it that way. Someone who actually can have a decent conversation with and maybe crack the odd joke or whatever on the demo or something. But I try not to speak to police officers on demos. I find it kind of you're fraternising with the other side, with the enemy, as I see it. But nevertheless, I'm sure there are one or two nice police officers. But it comes back to this whole argument about there's a rotten apple. It's not so much that the barrel is rotten, it's there's one or two rotten apples. If we weed them out, then we'll sort the problem out, the racism and their anti-working class attitudes. I don't really go for that, I must say, because I was listening to Radio 4, which occasionally has an odd reasonable programme on it, and they had someone from the States who's written a book about training police officers in America, and he says part of the problem is that when they go to the academy, everything is so confrontational. They don't teach them that maybe to talk to people and try to bring them down a bit and not straight off go for violence and so on. They don't teach them that. They teach them to look after themselves first, which means actually pull out the gun first before you ask any questions. And so maybe if we change the way that the training's done. We've had this in Britain as well. I think there was a TV show about it, actually showed some of the training of the police up in Cheshire, I think it was, and what we discovered from that was that actually the police tend to be more racist than the society outside, which we'll come to. So some of the things that came out of that programme, I think Brian Richardson wrote an article about it in Socialist Review, mentioned it, and some of the jokes that they came out with, which are just horrendous racist jokes, like something about you can take the dog out of the kennel, but you can't take the dog out, but it's still a dog. And this was a bit like Pakis. You can take a Paki out of Pakistan, but it's still a Paki. That's coming out of a police officer in the 21st century. And is that uncommon in the police? I suspect not. And the reason why is because the police are there, as we said, to do a particular job. And if you don't do the job, you end up leaving the police. There's Home Office report after Home Office report that shows that. If you don't fit in with the canteen culture, which includes sexism, racism, and anti-working class attitudes at its core, those are its core precepts, if you like. If you don't accept any of those, you end up getting pushed out, basically. You end up getting ostracised by your workmates and so on. And that's what tends to happen to anyone who's actually nice. These are one or two nice individuals we do meet inside the police force. But because they're there to do an oppressive job, fundamentally, despite the fact that many people, well, some people anyway, still have the idea that they're there to help old ladies across the road and so on. I think their oppressive side has become more apparent to ordinary people in this country over the years. And it's because of that type of a job that creates a mentality which is bullying, which is racist, and so on. there was one figure that came out, someone estimated that a policeman walking down the road, it would take them probably about 200 years for them to see a crime. The idea that the more bobbies on the beat you have, the better it keeps crime down, blah, blah, blah. And that the police are there to, investigate and find out what's happened and then go and make the arrests and so on. But that's not really how they operate. The police don't operate on the Inspector Morse point, approach, listen to a bit of opera, then go out into Oxford and go and talk to a few dons and work out exactly what's gone on and gone down and get all the information together, blah, blah, blah. That's not really how it works at all. Actually, everyone here knows exactly how it works. It's called things like stop and search. And so far from doing any investigating, all a black person has to do to have a problem, especially if you're a black youth, is to be black. And that is suspicion enough. Comrades probably know the figures, but you're 27 times more likely to be stopped and searched by policemen if you're black than if you're non-black. And that's for the Public Order, Section 60 of the Public Order Act, and it gets worse as you go through the different laws, and they've got so many hundreds of different laws they can use to pick you up with. So there's the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. To get arrested under those, you're something like 60 times more likely if you're a black person to be arrested. If it's under the terrorism legislation, that's just gone into the stratosphere. So that, of the hundreds of thousands of people they stop and search, I think it's less than 1% ever leads, and that's a fraction of 1% ever leads to a conviction. So their policing is oppressive for a reason. And again, for people in the home counties who don't appreciate these things, it's sometimes difficult to get your head around. All of the panoply of laws that they've got, which can stop people moving around an area, for example, which can set up these whole areas of Tottenham after the riots where you weren't allowed to actually stand and talk to people because there's a public order section being put on it, and therefore more than 6 people going around in a group was a problem. And I've got many, many more laws, not just in terms of on the streets, but the new prevent legislation has just gone through Parliament, which is scary and it's horrendous. McCarthy would have only dreamt of having such powers, to be honest. My partner's a teacher. She's just been to some prevent thing that the bosses put on, but they had to go to, and comrades here will be familiar with it as well. They're trying to turn other public servants into policemen, and of course the police will be using the same prevent legislation. And that is, essentially anyone who doesn't have mainstream views is seen as a problem. But you're more likely to be a problem if you've got the wrong colour skin. So I know people say that Islamophobia is about religion. Well, yeah, they dress it up as being about religion, but it's about racism. So that's fundamentally what it's about. Anyway, okay, so the police are not there to help old ladies across the road, and on the contrary, they're there to keep us in our place. So look at some more of the figures, which are quite horrendous. Since 1969, something like 3,400 people have been killed by the police after contact with a police officer. That is a huge figure. Between 2000 and 2010, I got this from Brian Richardson, who's a comrade and a barrister, so he knows what he's talking about. In those 10 years, 5,900 people died in custody, according to the Ministry of Justice. That's 2 people a week dying of custody. That is, I didn't know it was that much, that high. These are really, quite horrific figures. But, why are the police racist? Is there another way in which they could actually operate, which would get better results? Well, no, because the class struggle is not a neutral arena. So let's put it this way: Baltimore. In Baltimore, people know there was an uprising because of killing of yet another black man. But Baltimore is a half-black city, or actually majority black city. And over the years, since civil rights and Black Power movement, we now have all these black elected officials, and Baltimore is no different. So we have the head of the cops, the black mayor, and so on. But nevertheless, the police are still racist. It has made no difference. So again, if you look at the Metropolitan Police, if you did have a police force that reflected London, as we keep hearing about, it wouldn't look anything like it does today. Was it 30,000 cops in London, 130,000 thereabouts in the country as a whole? No, you look at the numbers of the number of the police and the numbers of the police, and think to yourself, well, surely if the police are there to do a job, wouldn't it be more efficient for them to actually catch the criminals instead of catching people that aren't criminals? So, it doesn't make sense. But actually, it does make sense from their point of view. From the point of view of the ruling class in this country, it makes perfect sense. The police look after the internal enemies of the state. That's the bottom line. And the army does deal with the external until there's a pre-revolutionary period, and then they have to use the army because the police aren't up to it. But as someone said, like coming to this room, why does the situation exist as it does? Well, it's divide and rule. How was the British Empire built? Divide and rule at home, but that's what they do here. Divide and rule abroad, but that's also what they do here at home. And so it's quite useful for the police and the state to have an ideology called racism, and in fact to perpetuate that ideology in order to divide and rule. So after the 2011 riots, for example, it would be nice to say that the whole country was all behind the rioters, behind the young people standing up for their rights and fighting back. That wasn't the case because they put out their narrative, the police and the government and the establishment, which said that it was all mindless criminals. And actually the majority of people went with that idea. But you could ask the same person, perhaps, who might be a train driver going on strike in London and saying, well, why are the police on my picket line? Couldn't they be doing something useful like catching rapists or burglars or anything else? But I don't necessarily see the two being connected. One is about criminal youth over there. The other is about, okay, the police shouldn't be on our picket line, but don't necessarily connect the two things. And the job of socialists is to connect the two things because they are linked. So if you say racism is an important part of ruling class ideology, you can see how that plays out in various points in British history in terms of the resistance to police racism. And it's not dissimilar to what happens anywhere else in the world, I imagine, especially in the United States. Many of the riots or uprisings or fightbacks are triggered by police brutality. It's either the police stopping someone, stopping someone in a car, beating someone up. It's one of those types of incidents that always triggers a riot, as they call them. So the most recent riot, the 2011 one, but the biggest one we've had for some years, were, as I say, given the impression that this is all about getting your Nike trainers out of the store, looting the stores and so forth, and it was nothing to do with Mark Duggan. None of these people, hardly any of these people have heard of Mark Duggan. But I've always found that a stupid argument. Why do you have to know someone personally in order to empathise with them? I don't know Mark Duggan, never knew Mark Duggan personally, but I empathise with the fact that he was executed on the streets of Tottenham. So they succeeded in kind of isolating the rioters to some extent, with notable exceptions, but they managed to do that. So how could we be in a situation where they can't succeed in doing that, isolating the rioters? Well, we've got times in history where we've actually had a bit of a breakthrough on that front. But it doesn't happen very, very often, but things kind of flow over and people begin to see the connections between things. People start to use their economic power. So, for example, in very recent history, again, the train drivers, there was an EDL demo that was meant to be happening in Tower Hamlets, and the Nazis figured that they would get on a train to get to their demo, but the train driver said, no, you won't be getting on any of our trains to go to your racist demo, and they basically used industrial action to stop the EDL mobilising. Now, wouldn't it be a fine thing if there's a black person killed by the police in London, Birmingham, or Manchester, or Glasgow, or anywhere else, that we could actually pull off a strike in the local authority, a strike on by the bus workers in the factories, whatever it is, of people to come out and say, no, we're not going to stand for this, we'll stand shoulder to shoulder with our black brothers and sisters. No, we haven't got there yet, that's true, comrades. But actually, these are the sorts of things that begin to happen as society becomes more and more fractured and more polarized. And we can begin to see those sorts of possibilities coming through as people start to rip down those contradictions in their heads as they see the reality before them. Let's just look at the question of resources. We're talking about the class nature of the police and the types of laws that we have in this country. Now, again, you could argue that a way of combating the police is through monitoring groups and such like, which there are quite a few of those sorts of things around, which are all important to know what the police are doing and so on. But it's just messing around at the edges. Because you look at things more fundamentally, it becomes more obvious that the police are there to do a job for the ruling class. So, for example, we've heard a lot about police spies, and I know no doubt police spies here at Marxism. I'm sure they'll be very happy spying on us. And for some reason, don't know why, but they think we're dangerous. Hopefully we can live up to that. But yeah, so they have police spies looking after lefties and campaign groups and so on. But where are the police spies at, for example, Royal Bank of Scotland? Because most definitely some criminals in the Royal Bank of Scotland, I know that, because they've pissed away literally tens of billions of pounds of public money. We don't know who's done any of this. There's been no police spies in the boardroom to tell us who made these decisions and who was responsible for it, because they're not interested in doing any of that. They're not there to police their own side. They're there to police us. There's a mass murderer called Anthony Blair. He's still wandering around the planet. I'm not quite sure how he hasn't had a bullet in his head just yet. I'm not suggesting that's done, Mr. Policeman. But, you've got to ask yourself, this man is responsible for the deaths of literally tens of thousands of people. Many would put that higher, if you want to take in all of the disaster that is the Middle East today. It's down to Mr. Blair. In other words, it's hundreds of thousands, you could say, of bodies at his door. But there's been no arrest that I know about of Blair, the war criminal. Benefit Street. I don't know if people watched any of that garbage. I didn't, but you get it secondhand. But basically, it's just another way of deriding working class people. We're all just scum, and if you're poor, it's your own fault, and so on. Ha ha, let's have a laugh at them trying to live on benefits. But was there a Banker Street? Did they go to, where did the bankers hang out? Mayfair. Did they go to Mayfair and just going to have a laugh at how the ruling class live? How they can spend, what was it, a grand on a dinner, as what's his name, the Prime Minister, did after he got himself elected, the first Tory majority. They went off to that club. Can't remember, I saw the pictures of it. I can't remember the name of the club. But they're spending like a grand, $2,000. I'm probably underestimating it on their little dinner to celebrate, and that's what people have to live on for like months on end. Drugs. Quite a lot of stops are done for drugs. Don't seize that much in the way of drugs, I don't believe. But I know in Tottenham they do a lot of stopping, and they do a lot of taking the weed off the kids and pocketing it, actually, and saying, on you go. That's their latest trick in London, I'm told. They just take it. And actually a few years back in the late 70s, early 80s maybe, I think it was Stoke Newington Police Station. Stokey, Stokey, I can't remember which way around it went now. But anyway, there was cocaine dealing happening from that station. They're going to get it off the criminals, and the police criminals would then go and recycle it to these same criminals, go and make some more bus, looks good on their record, and so it went on, this nice virtuous circle. Yeah, drugs. I always find that one rather strange. And the fact that they have different laws, depending on who they're arresting. So in America, you can do neat cocaine, which is not cut with anything, not cut with washing powder or whatever it is. And you can do that quite nicely to your heart's content, and no one's going to bother you. Well, not too much anyway, that's what I'm told. And but if you do crack cocaine, where you burn it, and it's little crystals and so on, I won't go too much into detail, you might think I'm a crackhead. I'm not. But apparently you have a different law for that, and you go down for that. So in other words, because it's anti-working class, that's the whole point of the operation. And if they're really serious about doing some drugs, if they're serious about getting drug dealers and users, why didn't they go to Henley Regatta? I've always been amazed by that one, because if you want to find out where the coke sniffing is going on on a very large scale, they should be down at the Regatta, where all the other the posh boys and girls hang out. But they aren't. You think about, in my branch, I have someone who's got a warrant card because he's a health and safety inspector. And so he can make arrests, I think that means, if he's got a warrant card. But, if you look at the laws against the bosses, killing people on building sites, well, hands up the last time a boss went to jail for one of their workers dying on the building site. It doesn't happen. Do the police go and investigate these things? They're not interested. There's no laws about any of those sorts of things. I've got 5 minutes left. So what is the solution? Black faces in high places is what we're told is the solution, which again doesn't really add up, because we've now got more black faces in high places than we've ever had. In fact, we've now got more black and Asian MPs than we've ever had. But actually things have gone backwards. It's not helping us in any way. The best example, of course, is President Obama, who's obviously a black president of the United States of America, which is something I've never thought I'd never live to see. It's happened, but has it changed anything in America? No, he's just the front man for the American state, American capitalism. The fact that he's black has actually made no great difference. In fact, quite possibly Hillary Clinton coming next could be better. She might do an Eleanor Roosevelt little thing, get the black baby to come in the White House and stuff like that. That's what he did back then. But he hasn't done anything really that's actually fundamentally changed the setup in America. So actually the gap between rich and poor has got wider, and because of that, racism's got worse, and the position of black people has got worse within that. And he's done nothing to change any of that. I talked a bit about how we should try and bring the two sides together, if you like. But people might see black youth fighting the police as being a problem, but when the police mess with their picket line, they might see that as a different issue. How do you bring those together? Well, people like the Black Panthers in America and the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, which hopefully we can talk about in the discussion, did precisely that. We know a lot about the Black Panthers, which was black power group set up in the United States. And there's a new film that's come out about us trying to get them to show it at Marxism. We couldn't pull it off. But anyway, hopefully it'll be out soon in this country. And in it, it's got some footage of how the Black Panthers went out of their way to go and talk to the hillbillies in West Virginia. Kind of white people live in the mountains there, quite poor, not very good farmland and stuff like that. And they wanted to set up the hillbilly Panthers. And so the Black Panthers went to go and talk to them about how you should go about doing this. And they actually made a deliberate effort to actually go to the white working class. I didn't like that term, because I think the working class is the working class, black and white. But anyway, they went and made a deliberate effort to actually go out to other areas and other parts of the community. I think Noel Halifax has written something about this in terms of the Gay Liberation Front, how they actually were inspired by the Black Panthers. How, for example, the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, which was after they tried to smash the Panthers, political people went into the car factories and started organising in the car factories and took the lesson. But basically, we had the Panthers on the streets. Some of us were armed to patrol the pigs, as they called it, and stuff. But the police have got more guns than us. That's the bottom line. And if they want to smash us, they will. And that's what they did to the Black Panthers. They executed their leadership. They decapitated the organisation. They infiltrated every single chapter, without exception, every single branch of the Black Panther Party in the United States. And there's the FBI informers who were the key people that brought guns into the Panther offices. And then would ring out the police and say, they've got guns in there, and then there'll be a shootout and Panthers will get killed. All of that. So people learnt a lesson, and the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement people have said, well, actually, let's get into the factories where we do actually have economic power. So when they start messing in our community, we have a strike on the line here at Ford in Detroit, and so on. And actually, that is the way to start seeing how things could be done differently. Because fundamentally, and I'll just bring things to a finish, fundamentally, we could take the Black Bloc approach, you'll see on demos, the anti-capitalist demos and more recent demos. Well, everyone dresses up in black, sticks a mask on, and goes and fights for state, as in throwing bricks at the police and so on. I don't have a problem throwing bricks at the police, but you can have a fight with the state as much as you like. But it comes back to the question, who's got more tanks, guns, and armory it's them, they've got it all. So we can have one fight today, but they'll come back and they'll win the next day. That's not a way that we're going to actually be able to resist effectively, I don't think. No, what we have to do is to paralyse their side. People sometimes are worried about the police because they think, well, I could get killed in this revolution. But the truth is, the police aren't actually a problem in revolutions. The police tend to take their clothes off in a revolution, not literally become nudists, but change out of their uniform. And so you get all the police, in Barcelona kind of disappeared and left it to the workers' militia. All of a sudden they just disappeared, so they just weren't there anymore. That tends to be what happens in the revolution because they've got no role to play. They can't. They see hundreds of thousands of people on one side. There's only 130,000 cops in the whole of Britain. Yeah, it's in a country of 60 million people. Of a massive working class. So no, they can't. They can't stop us once we start fighting back. And just to finish. On that question of how we get class unity against the police, it grows out of the struggle. I remember in the miners' strike going to South Yorkshire to a Pick village called Armthorpe and the Miners' Welfare Club, people busily organising stuff, what have you. And I came in and someone from the back saw me and said, "Oh, I hope you brought some petrol bombs up from Brixton," because the Brixton riots is not too distant a memory. Now, obviously, that's on the one side, you could say there's a prejudice about, because I'm black, I must know something about petrol bombs. Actually, I still don't know how to make a petrol bomb. I should look it up. If I do that, I'll get nicked and prevent stuff. He's trying to actually make a link to say that actually our struggle is your struggle. Let's unite those struggles. In a very crude way, he'd done it, but nevertheless, that shows you the beginnings of how people begin to actually begin to come together and to see a common enemy in front of them. And I think with the police, there is only one solution, and it's not monitoring, it's not having legal inspectors on demos, although I think all of these things are really important, and we should have legal inspectors on demos. All of those things are important and have to be done. But fundamentally, the only way we're going to solve this problem is actually through revolutionary overthrow of the current society. That sounds like a tall order, but actually it isn't that tall an order, because revolutions and social explosions happen all the time. The trouble is, are we in position to actually make sure that our side wins, or we lose again? And unfortunately we lose very, very often. That's why we're still having these meetings about socialism as opposed to living in a socialist society. And if we can draw some of those lessons out for the future about how we can go forward and actually use our economic power for overt political ends, and actually spread the struggle beyond the families that lead the march every year to Downing Street United Friends and Families campaign. Wouldn't it be great one year that we had actually 100 union banners on it, but we had actually delegation coming from workplaces around the country, actually to show that actually this isn't just a battle for people and their families who disproportionately happen to be black, it's just for them to go and march to plead for their to put these police in prison. Wouldn't it be a great thing if actually the whole trade union movement got behind that? That's not such a wild imagining, because that's exactly how the Lawrence campaign got going. Spoke to Neville Lawrence the other day at a TUC event, and he said that explicitly. Without the trade unions, our campaign would not have started, would not have got anywhere. And I think that's the same goes, some Claudia says, and I think that's the same goes for the police in general. It's a class battle which all of us have to fight, and it's not just one to be left over here for black people to fight, or just left for white working class kids on the estates to fight by themselves. It's actually a class issue for us. And I started at the beginning, what are the police good for? Absolutely nothing. Well, can you imagine the world without the police? People say, well, no, I can't, because they'll just be riotous, it'll just be madness, it'll just be everyone going around breaking laws, if there are any laws, and so on. And there's always the example, and I'll finish here, of the picking your nose example. There's no policeman that tells us not to go around picking our nose. It's just not socially acceptable. Hopefully, for most of us it isn't. Socially acceptable to do it in front of other people. You just don't do it, So you can imagine a society in which it's not socially acceptable to be racist. It's not socially acceptable to steal from others, and there's no need to steal from others when actually everything is free. So you can see the beginnings of how you can actually get rid of the need for an oppressive, for a state. And part of the reason, what a state is, as Lenin, the Russian Revolution, put it, is special bodies of armed men. That's what the state is. It's not the nurse, although they are paid by the state. The bit that we're concerned about is the oppressive bit. And actually we can break the back of the police and the military and the oppressive state by actually using our economic and social power from below.
My name's Dave Lynch. I'm a teacher. I've been teaching since 1980, and I'm very proud to have been part of an organisation called ALTAF when I was teaching in London, All Teachers Against Racism and Fascism. And there are people in this room who've had a longer history of this. Now, in the 80s, there was something called the Policy Studies Institute, which did a comprehensive review of the Metropolitan Police, 4 volumes. And we used much of that information to stop the police coming into schools. And we were successful at that time, certainly in my school, and I know over a lot of schools in Ilya. Now, I want to just draw your attention to, Brian's figures have been mentioned, and I want to draw you to an organisation called Inquest. The figures that I'm going to tell you now are based on their own casework for deaths in police custody, and I haven't included deaths in prison or immigration deaths. We're just talking about deaths in police custody and those people who have not died as a result of self-inflicted injuries after dealing with the police. These are the figures since 1990 from Inquest. So, you know, other organisations may have different figures, and this is no way to cause any division between anybody. It's their figures. They say 1,515 people have died in police custody since 1990 to now. 336 of those were in the Metropolitan Police. 1,179 of those were in other forces. Black and minority ethnic deaths in the Metropolitan Police, according to their own casework, 84 people died, and 67 people, that's the Met Police, 67 people died in other forces. 9 unlawful killing verdicts, 1 public inquiry, not 1 single prosecution of a police officer. Now, that's why I argue that the police should be nowhere near a school for a start. As a teacher, I'm proud of the arguments we've had and won, and in recent years, I'm afraid we've lost, because in some schools, they even have a police officer parked in the school. Now, the last thing I want to say is this: www.inquest.org.uk for further information for you. I don't want to take it any further. You look at the figures, you make your mind up. Why is it that disproportionately black and minority ethnic people die in police custody or in engagement with the police, die in prison? Why are there so many black and minority ethnic people in prison, and why are so many people in immigration centres who have committed no crime?
Hello, my name is Allende. I'm member for SWP for Norwich. But glad for my comrades to raise this issue about the police. Basically, it's about all the package, about the courts and the police, the races, about the black people. These things happened to me last year in September. Sorry about comrade, because I used to be one for the North people, but basically I changed my life. Then the police just come on my door. They arrest me for no reason. They put me in custody for like 2 days after they took me to court. Then I spent to the judge. I was like, basically, all the police they're doing is no sense, because I'm a black man. They just arrest me for no reason. There's a lot of black people inside the prison for no reason, for no crime. Then the judge was like, oh, I'll give a bail for that. Then after we come back for the court, then the judge have to drop the case because there's no evidence. Then basically all I'm going to say is about we need all this system to get changed about the black people. The black people go step down for no reason. So many youngers, they're in custody for no reason. What's that? What kind of system is it? We need to teach all those police. They're there for us. They're not there for abuse. To protect the public. But they abuse the public. That's what we need to raise our voice. That's what I'm standing to defend all the people. They've been in custody for no reason.
Nobody's indicated they want to speak. Anybody want to ask a question? Yeah.
I'm glad that Dave Clinch quoted the figures from Inquest, because if there's any reason why you wouldn't trust a barrister, trust me, it's because I'm a barrister, not... Gary, I think, was rather generous there. But, comrades, some of you will have seen, I imagine, the series that has been on BBC One over the last few weeks called The Met Policing London. And if you've seen that, you would think that the police are... Actually, Gary features very prominently at the very beginning of it. But if you watch that programme, you would think that the police are a wonderful institution, because you see Bernard Hogan Howe, the Commissioner himself, revelling with people at the Notting Hill Carnival. You see a police officer giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a poor victim of a stabbing who sadly subsequently dies. You do see them solving crimes. And actually, let's concede that the police do solve some crimes, some murders, some sexual offences, some burglaries and so on. However, it's a percentage which, if you were that inefficient in your workplace, would probably get you the sack, actually. That's how... because fundamentally the role of the police, as Gary has quite rightly said, is to police us, to keep us in our place, to put us down and so on. Even, actually, you talk about the Stephen Lawrence family campaign, that fantastic, inspiring campaign that did expose and put the question of institutional racism on the agenda, made people realise it's not simply about a few individuals, but that the whole barrel is rotten. Even during the course of that campaign, the police had sent spies in to get dirt, to dig up dirt on that family. That's just how absolutely rotten they are. But I want to just say something and finish by talking about the Stephen Lawrence family campaign, because Gary is absolutely right to say that that is one of the best examples of... Actually, one of the reasons, I think, why the Met have launched this programme is to try and repair a tarnished image, because people don't have the trust that they once had 40, 50 years ago. You know, that Dixon of Dock Green image of the police, or of Morse's brilliant detective solving crimes. Most people realise that the police are bullying and oppressive, and increasing numbers of working class people feel that, and it was precisely in those circumstances and why the Lawrence family received so much support. It wasn't because of the Daily Mail, despite that murderers headline, that a very good headline that they had back in 1997 that people may be aware of, that the Lawrence campaign were able to keep going. They were able to keep going literally because the trade union movement underwrote their campaign. That happened because consciously, anti-racist activists and socialists up and down the country went round with the petitions, with the stalls, went in, passed resolutions in their workplace and took it to the trade union movement. That is a real concrete example of black and white working class solidarity, and it's that kind of solidarity that put the police on the back foot in the first instance. Tragically, of course, the figures for things, the way that stop and search and so on have gone astronomically through the roof over the last 15 years has shown that isn't enough to get rid of the rotten police, that we need a revolutionary transformation to get rid of them lock, stock and barrel.
So the Asian lady there and the yeah, Asian probably first, that one. Yeah, the lady there and the lady there. Please stick to 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Aisha. I'm from Edinburgh, SWP. What I'd like to, just following on from the speakers and what Gary has been talking about, it's true that over the last 2 decades or so, we've seen the police being exposed, whether it's Stephen Lawrence or whether it's Mark Duggan or whether it's Sheikha Bayo in Dundee up in Scotland, who was murdered by the police, and the police lied continuously and told different stories to their parents, and it's something you would imagine that comes straight out of an apartheid state, like in South Africa, what happened to young black men, basically. And it's true that you need revolutionary change to get rid of the state, basically, because what we have is a racist state, basically, and it's like the revolutionary Lenin he talked about in State and Revolution. He exposed the police and the state for what they actually are, and that they're there to keep people down, to oppress, to torture, to victimise, and they're there to protect the power of the ruling classes. And it's important that we get unity between black and white people, and some of the ways that Brian listed and going about doing that in campaigns and stuff like that. And one of the things you can do is in things like UAF anti-fascist campaigns. I've seen unity of black and white people there on the demonstrations, and the police being blatantly exposed for fraternising with the Nazis right in front of everybody's faces, basically. So I think there's still hope, and fighting against austerity and racism, and looking at how the disabled activists were treated at the House of Commons by the police exposes them for what they really are, and we can get a different sort of society where we don't have police and racism, basically.
Hello, my name's Jo Lang. I just wanted to remind comrades, I'm sure you all know, that one of our comrades, BlairPeach, was killed 36 years ago in April. He was killed on an anti-racist demonstration against the National Front during the run-up to the election of Margaret Thatcher. Now, they know who killed him. By they, I mean the police. It was one of 6 SPG, Special Patrol Group members, who killed him, who hit him over the head with a lead-filled truncheon. Now, no one, 30 years later, has ever been brought to justice. There has never been an inquiry, a public inquiry into what happened in Southall. Now, it seems like a long time ago, but hundreds of people were injured. Hundreds of people were arrested. Although Blair was killed, they almost killed several other people during that demonstration. And obviously, over the years, we have campaigned as SWP comrades. We have worked with the families. Now, I would like to really pay tribute to the families of those killed by the police, because the women and men I've met over the years who are involved in those campaigns have worked tirelessly to bring justice for their families. Now, our comrade Aisha mentioned UAF. I would urge comrades, if you haven't got, I'm going to do a bit of a plea here, but if you haven't got a standing order to UAF, please take out one. We need your money. We need to organise. On Saturday, we were demonstrating against a very tiny group of fascists, Nazis with their swastika flags. They're still there, as we know. They're always there, and we must never be complacent. Over the years, we have, I think, done a fantastic job. But we need your money, we need your support, because we have to keep on campaigning for justice. And there will be another Mark Duggan. There will be another young man killed in police custody. And it will keep on happening. And unless we are organising around the anti-fascist struggle, more and more people will be injured and killed. So, please, comrades, don't forget BlairPeach. 36 years and still no justice. They know who did it, and what the last comment was, well, we can't bring anyone to justice because unless they admit they did it, it's too late. So there you go. So join UAF.
Yes, yeah. All right. There's a man in a mustard shirt. That's it.
Steve Sparks, RS21. Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing about the link about class and racism is a very, very important one. I think when you look at immigration into this country, like when the trade union bureaucracy were not keen on people from the West Indies and the old empire and all that coming into British jobs, and there was like resistance to them actually even being in the unions back in the 50s and 60s, and it's very much the case that it's anti-racist socialists and the unity of struggle that is there in working class battles that has fought racism over the years and made it completely unacceptable in many places. But as was mentioned, there's still issues, like when you look at how the ruling class tries to divide us and fights back. We've got Islamophobia and how that is reasonably acceptable in many places you wouldn't expect it to be. There's not a realisation that is racism, and although some say the trade union leaders want to fight and are on our side, and that I think that there's very little show of that. And when the construction workers took a racist strike after dear old, what's his name, the banker Labour bloke, and that said British jobs for British workers, and that there was a reactionary strike led by the trade union leaders. So it's a battle that we always have to fight. But the end result of that was that a few months later there was another strike where they concentrated on the conditions rather than saying British jobs for British workers, and they struck with the support of Polish workers in unofficial action. We have the power and we have the interest in fighting as a class, black and white.
After this speaker, I've got four people who want to speak. Okay, I keep it as 4 people. Then I've got to go to some. I've got to make some announcements as well. So I'm sorry for the people that have indicated. Okay.
I'm Ken Allende from Socialist Worker. I want to go back to Dixon-Green because I think there's an interesting thing. The fact that the police were racist in the 40s and 50s. The police attacked and beat up black people in the 40s and 50s. But it was right through, the sort of thing Gary's talking about. It was much more recently that juries started sometimes accepting that the police were lying, and it wasn't. And I think that one of the reasons that this comes up is because of class struggle, as people talk about. It was down to the fact that in the 70s and 80s, you suddenly had, particularly in the 80s, masses of police fighting masses of working class people on a much wider thing. And I think the thing Gary was saying about can you build petrol bombs is quite important, because suddenly all sorts of white working class people in communities who hadn't necessarily seen struggles of racism as being connected to them started saying, these are the same thugs who were attacking us now, who were attacking black people, and starting to realise that black people weren't necessarily the problem. And I think that's very important in terms of how the police shift, because the police also were forced to shift and start talking about being anti-racist because they were pushed back. It's right through the 1670s, they were racist. They didn't care about being racist. They saw it as being part of their role. And I think if you look at what's going on in America now, the shocking thing about the attacks that you've had on people, all these black people, is the degree to which the police really don't care. They can be filmed doing stuff. They can do all sorts of stuff like that. But they can get away with it. And But I think one of the things, this is just to finish up with a thing about why a consistent fight against capitalism is so important, because the other thing that you see from America, the other thing that happened at the end of the period of the Black Panthers and so on, was a period when the police and the American state was terrified of black people fighting back, of there being a revolution and so on. And one of the things they did all sorts of crackdowns on the Black Panthers, but I think in a way the more important and cleverer thing they did was incorporate lots of the black middle class. So you suddenly got black police chiefs. You suddenly got a whole section of the black middle class who started identifying with the top and the bosses and not with poor black people. And that is something that, unless you're consistently arguing against capitalism and saying capitalism has to be smashed, is always a danger that will come up. And it's certainly a danger with sort of black nationalist ideas that sort of say if we just had black people controlling things, you can then have and end up, as was mentioned in Baltimore, where you have a black police chief who's still ordering police to attack black people.
Woman there. Yeah. Right, I'm going to cut it down to 2 minutes now, okay? Because we're going to fit everybody in, okay? And we'll tap with the microphone after one.
Okay. Yeah, I want to emphasise what the last speaker said really about class and how we have to smash the system and to get rid of the divide and rule, because people will know in South Yorkshire, the police there, the same police responsible for Hillsborough, responsible for Orgreave. And Hillsborough was about the police hating working class people, basically. That's what led to ordinary people breaking down those advertising hoardings and saving people, and the police absolutely doing nothing and saying that the fans have got to be penned in, and then all the filth that they came out with against Liverpool fans afterwards. And Orgreave very much the same. They attacked miners, working class people fighting for their jobs and communities, and the whole power of the state was brought down upon them. And those are the examples. And I should say, I think everybody here should support the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. Recently the IPCC have said they're not going to investigate, which is an outrage, and I think we've got to really keep the pressure up now for a people's inquiry and make it really happen, because it's only because of the struggles of the Hillsborough families that actually anything happened in the end, and we've got to keep that pressure up. One little example where sometimes the police sexism trumps their racism was in Rotherham over the child sex abuse. Because they saw the young women who were the victims as trash. They couldn't care less. They were asking for it. It was their fault. They were to blame. In that case, this idea that it was about political correctness, the police being soft on the Asian community, and that's why they didn't do anything, is absolute crap. In that case, it was about class, because those young women were seen as rubbish for those coppers. One of them said an 11-year-old girl basically was consenting to rape. It's appalling, and I think that's a good example of why we do have to emphasise class.
Woman there, and the man in black with last speaker. Okay. Excuse me, woman. Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal from the Kingston SWP. One of my comrades said to me once before when she was talking about the police that they're essentially the paid guard dogs of the bourgeoisie. And I think it's true, because a lot of people say, oh, the police, they're working class as well, they're hard-working people, blah, blah, blah. But I think they well and truly crossed a class line, when they signed up. And I've been reading a book recently, called The New Jim Crow. It's about the prison industrial complex in the US. And the author actually talks about the criminal justice system in the US and describes it not simply as tainted by racial bias, but as a stunningly comprehensive and well-disguised system of racialised social control. And she talks about it as sort of a new caste system, implemented obviously by the ruling elite, as the comrade said, for a sort of a divide and conquer strategy. And she actually cites some really interesting statistics where she compares crime rates and incarceration rates in the US. And there's virtually no correlation between the two. I mean, since I think it was about 30 years ago, America's prison population was about 350,000, and now it's something like 2 million. They build one university for every 30 prisons they build there. And I think the comrades probably know the statistic. There's more black men in prison in the US now than there was in slavery in the 1800s. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. And obviously this is all sort of perpetuated by living in a capitalist system where the profit motive rules all, which you can see with the rise of the prison industrial complex in the US as well. So it's not. It's against the working class, but it's so hugely racist as well that it just blows your mind. But it just shows what a sort of a venomous system capitalism is.
Thank you. Back to the last speaker.
Dave White, Wolverhampton. As a social worker, I occasionally have the privilege of working with the police, so I have to take exception to something that Gary actually said about he's only ever found two nice, or a couple of nice police officers. Because if you remember, after Plebgate and the cuts, all of a sudden they were all nice, weren't they? Because obviously they were under attack, and to an extent they kind of got soft on us when we were kind of organising resistance to the EDL and going on demonstrations. So it's kind of a mock kind of question in terms of, I'll always fight cuts as a worker, and I think that's a principle that we stand for, but that doesn't necessarily mean, defending the police in terms of their cuts, because a leopard will always go back to its spots and they'll kind of revert back. Now, you'd kind of think the police actually are the experts on law, because, you know, they're out on the street, allegedly, you know, and, you know, they're arresting people, stop and search and whatever and whatever and whatever. But if you actually talk to them, which I don't particularly recommend, but if you actually talk to them, their knowledge of the law is absolutely appalling. And it kind of gives you the impression that they make it up as they go along. And particularly if you're black, okay, they make it up as they go along, because for them, I guess the end justifies the means. Now, they do have access to other laws apart from PACE and so on. I work in mental health, and it is a fact that, you know, the police actually arrest more black men in particular under the Mental Health Act than any other kind of group. And the result of that is, once people are in that system, you know, they're incarcerated often in a different way, which is in mental health institutions and so on. So I just want to draw that point. The police are crap on law and they use it against black people.
Well, I'll come back on, well, there weren't any questions really, but I'll come back on some of the stuff anyway. Yeah, Brian's point, and the comment made the points from Inquest about about figures, and it's a similar problem to the United States when journalists started asking, well, what are the figures for the amount of people that the police are killing every day, every week in that city, in that country. And it's similar here. In fact, the fact that they don't keep those figures, the fact that they're so sloppy about it, in fact there are different versions of the figures banding around. I've got one version I got from the Socialist Review, which sounded quite spot on, 5,800. But anyway, Inquest say different. But anyway, that's indicative, I think, of the fact that they don't, like Comrade said earlier, they're not really that bothered about how many people they killed. And, you know, they do it with impunity. They don't even collect the figures on it. So it's down to organisations like Inquest to try and actually get to the bottom of it, dig their way through. Figures difference. Black Comrade was saying about his experiences with the police, and there was a phrase I caught from what you were saying about to teach the police to act differently, and I just don't think it's possible to teach the police to act differently, which was trying to kind of get at in the meeting, is that it's not the individuals that's the issue, it's a structured thing. It's what we talk about, institutional racism. You know, it's part of the institution, it's built in, and it's part of the nature of the job. It forces you to act in a particular way. So, yeah, you can do more training with them and stuff, but I think it'll just end up training them to be better at hiding their the bruises they inflict on people, or making sure they turn off the camera. They're going to have cameras, are they, or whatever. All of a sudden they'll run out of battery every time something important happens. You know, we all know what's going to go down. That's why I just don't hold much truck. I'm not being dismissive. I just don't think it's going to be a solution. And as comrades have said, you know, the main solution is actually a class one. That's where we have our power as black and white people. You know, they're picking on the black kids on the streets, but most of those black kids will have a mum and dad that works, and many of those people, because there's a disproportionate number of black people working in public services, there's a disproportionate number of black people that are in trade unions. You know, therefore we do have power. As someone stood up at the TEC Black Members Council members meeting, annual conference, and said, you know, why isn't the TEC not doing something for us? Which, strictly speaking, the TEC does do some stuff. They produce some books and things, and they do help out with money and various things. But it's true in terms of actually, it would be great if you could get a trade union leader to stand up on TV when riots go down or whatever, and actually put the truth out there, because it actually has social weight in society. That's why that's this sort of thing. That's why we fight for those sorts of things in our unions, and that's why we see it's so important to bring political issues, overtly political issues, into our unions to actually show that actually it's one fight. Steve from RS21 was saying about about trade unions, and actually you can actually have reactionary strikes. And I think it's worth just making the point that, you know, because we go on about trade unions, we go on about workers, doesn't mean that we think that all workers are non-racist, are anti-racist. Doesn't mean that we think that all working people are wonderful people. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fact that who has power in society, and working people are a particular class that can't get ahead without actually linking arms with your brother and sister, be they black, white, gay, straight, whatever. You're forced into that. That's why, as someone said, you know, the struggles of the 70s and the 80s and before then, in this country, actually those are struggles which involve black and white workers fighting together, and through those fights, actually the racism gets challenged. That's why we're where we are here, you know, where we are today in terms of the anti-racist discourse in unions. It's not acceptable to be racist in the trade union in this country. That just didn't just come from nowhere. It came from battles that have been fought in the unions through class struggle, through the fights against the bosses, and people seeing the need for class unity, and class unity trumps racism. All right, if you don't believe me, you can see the inverse of that, the opposite of that, where you don't have class unity. If you want to know why the poor whites are so poor in the deep south of the United States of America, and by the way, I should just let people know, I got a thing from the New York Times telling me that the flag has now been removed from the state capital in South Carolina. Only another 50 states to go. Is it 50 states? 51? I can't remember. Anyway, not 50, so it's only the southern states that fly that slave flag. Something which I've always found astounding, but it was still flying. But, yeah, so you can have reactionary strikes, as I say, strikes in favour of racism or in favour of sexism and so on. But there's not very many of them, to be quite honest. Imperial typewriters is one of the famous ones from the 70s, where you get craft workers trying to keep their position, and they see new workers, some of them who happen to be black, coming in and actually threatening their position. And instead of seeing it as an argument about uniting skilled and unskilled workers together against the boss, they took a backward position about trying to defend their little patch. But you don't actually get that many of those kind of those strikes historically, for a very good reason. But it's something that had to be fought for. It didn't always exist. So, Karl Marx talked about in the 19th century, when the people that built the canals and factories of the Industrial Revolution, mostly Irish people, as it happens, and he said, how do we work out why, how do we understand the current weakness of the English working class? Well, it's their hatred of the Irish, kept alive by the comic papers and the pulpit, which is very much the same as today. No one listens to the pulpit anymore, but we certainly get a lot of comic papers. So it's same today. So it's something that has to be fought for, not a static thing. And I think it's worth pointing out a very good point Ken made, but the police, the reason why they have to have shows like for the Met, why they have to do so much PR at the moment, is because they've actually, their position in society is no longer as on a pedestal like it used to be. But people are seeing through some of their lies. Things like the Mitchell thing was an eye-opener for lots of people in my office. I've got quite a few Tories in my office, but it doesn't mean they're going to back to join the Socialist Workers Party or about to become anti-police as such. But it shook their world. The fact that the policemen lie. Wow. That was a shocker for them. And so, the police are not in that Dixon or Doc Green world anymore. The prison industrial complex, if we think we've got problems in Britain, check out the United States. The comrade was quite right, 2 million people. And industrial complex is a good word for it, because it's industry as well, because they get people working. They don't produce a hell of a lot in terms of what is produced by US capitalism, but all federal furniture all gets made in these prisons, where rape is institutionalized, where racism is institutionalized. Does anyone watch that Netflix show, Orange is the New Black? It's got some interesting little bits in it every now and again, but which basically says, racism is institutionalized in prison. So I don't care if you're an anti-racist or whatever. You've got to stick with your black people. You've got to stick with white people, because other people can look after your back. And it creates a worse version of the racism outside. And then you add in the institutionalized rape and the rest of it. It's just like, it's how that country can stand up at United Nations, talk about being the land of the free. I just do not know, because they incarcerate more people than China. Is that right? And I think, it's the more you look into it, the worse it gets. What's the name who's the writer of that book? It sounds like an interesting book. Emma Alexander. I think I've looked. And, so that is a huge problem. Again, the scale of the the prison industrial complex, they've got a few complexes in America, big, it just shows how the states and racism, it's all tied together, and how they use it to keep us in our place. I think the new Jim Crow is a good way of putting it. Jim Crow being the panoply of laws that they had to divide black from white and keep black people in their place, but they're doing it differently now, and the criminal justice system is the way that they do it. And finally, I can't see any more questions. If I've missed anything, let me know. Finally, the police, how I always like to say at the end of these meetings, how do I defend myself? Because one of the reasons I've never driven is that I've never fancied getting stopped every 2 minutes by the police. I don't have a driving license. I can't be doing that and live in a town. I've got reasonable public services and so on. But, you know, how do you protect yourself? And I always say to people, come to meetings, well, first thing to do to protect yourself is be part of an organisation. So first thing you've got to say is join the Socialist Workers Party, but join any other organisation, because to be perfectly honest, I remember when Winston Silcott's brother, George, used to come to this event every year to collect money and to get support for Winston's campaign. And one night the police decided to arrest George. And I think we had 2 or 3 branches in that part of London then. And so we got onto the telephone tree, said, rang around comrades and said, oh, they've just arrested George, they're taking him to St Anne's police station or whatever. And within an hour, we had 30 people at the police station and they released him. You know? So our best defence is actually being organised. And I urge people to join the Socialist Workers Party tonight and to encourage your friends and workmates to do the same. Because we're organised, actually that's our main power, because we, you know, our power is at work. And if we can actually win that battle in the workplace about why we have to actually relate to black kids, and actually they're not the enemy, they're part of the solution, and that their problems are our problems, and that we should fight together, then we'll start to see how we can get ahead. And it was a beautiful sight when the students were rioting a few years back and took down the Tory party headquarters, Millbank, what have you. Actually, a number of working class kids in those demos, a lot of them black, was actually quite astounding. There's lots of FE colleges came out in London as well. It was a little known fact of that. So you had actually, you know, the middle class UCL students and so on, Institute of Education students, if you like, and you had the working class FE students that all came together and actually saw what fighting the police was all about together. And lots of people will have kept those lessons in their heads. We've got to go and find them and get them to join the Socialist Workers Party, actually. But, you know, but that's the way forward. Black and white unite and fight. And we are the many, they are the few. And the final slogan from a socialist, if we all spat at once, we'd drown the bastards.